Hey, welcome to Chapter Chats. Today we're diving into Chapter 2 of Chuck's 5th edition of ISD from the Ground Up, a no-nonsense approach to instructional design. This chapter, titled 9 Generations of Learning Transfer, takes us on a really great journey through how knowledge and skills move from theory to application. We'll explore what learning transfer really means, how technology has shaped its evolution across 9, possibly 10 generations, and what lessons we can draw for the future, I should say, of instructional design. Whether you're curious about the big picture or looking to deepen your understanding of this critical concept, there's so much to uncover. So, Chuck, let's get started with our first question in this chapter chat. How would you define learning transfer in a way that resonates with someone unfamiliar with the term, but curious about its importance in instructional design?
Well, learning transfer is how we learn. It's where do we get our information? Is it from another person? Is it from a product? Is it from drawings on a cave wall? Is it from gestures? Is it from one thing or another? And when I first started thinking about these generations of learning transfer, the one thing that hit me was nobody's really blown this up to see how this has progressed over the history of civilization, essentially. Nobody has looked at how we went from one jump to another jump to another jump to get to the place we are now with AI, right? This whole notion of, okay, how are we transferring things? In the 9th generation, we're transferring things without people being involved or even originating it, right? It's all technology. That is a significant leap in how we learn. So each one of these 9 generations is a point of departure from, okay, we started with this, and now we're a little bit more involved, and now we got a little bit more stuff, and now we got technology, and now we have people thinking for us. And the people are computers and technology. But in the end, all of this is how we take information from some source and we input it into us as human beings.
The book outlines 9 generations of learning transfer and even hints at a potential 10th. Can you walk us through some of these generations and share what might make the 10th generation unique?
Well, I think as we look at this, ask yourself, what are the first things that you remember learning? And how old were you? So I can remember when I was 18 months old. And that seems pretty young for a lot of people. I think the average is, 2 to 3 years, the first memories that you retain throughout your life. But I remember 18 months. I remember being in a stroller in a house. It was actually an apartment that my parents had that they moved out of when I was 18 months. But I remember being there. I remember the entire environment. And so that was a learning experience for me, because that showed me that that was the beginning of my journey in life, was in those very humble beginnings, which I'm still proud of. But what it says to us as instructional designers is, okay, maybe all the learning that we concentrate on with very formal courses and other things is not really the way people learn most of what they learn. And if you go back and look at it, and this was the preamble to this whole discussion when I first started writing this up, was the notion that most of what we learn is not an informal environment. Think about all that we learn until we even go to a preschool or something else. All the things we learn from those that are around us, our parents, our siblings, everybody else. We learn to walk. We learn to talk. We learn to behave, at least in your case, probably, not so much in mine. But there are clues around us continuously, visually, orally, all kind of things, textures. When's the first time you remember knowing the difference between one texture and another? And that was not in a formal environment. That was in a learning transfer modality. So I think it's really important for instructional designers as we look at each of these, and we go up to 100 someday. I mean, that's fine too. It's just Chuck's view of how these things progress. But I think it's more important in terms of a strategy for instructional designers is don't rely continuously or only on the formality of what you do. So we've talked about informal learning on here that, once again, I think most of the learning we have is informal. I mean, formal learning certainly has its place, but as instructional designers, we need to be okay with the fact that not everybody learns within the product that we create. So when people walk in, they have prerequisite knowledge. Where do they get that knowledge? Is it from life experience, from other courses? Is it from peers? Where's that all come from? So as we look at these generations, in the beginning, it was just two human beings grunting at each other. We didn't have language yet. We didn't have any of those things. If we saw an animal or we were hunting or we were trying to accomplish something, you would touch someone or you would aim someone in the right direction or you would do whatever. And then we progressed into language, and then we got into technology. Think about the impact of the printing press on learning transfer. We now went from more traditional oral history to what? The printed word that stands on its own. And yes, you had that in caves to some degree, but not to the degree you had it with the printing press. So whether you think the Koreans created it or whether you think it was something else, it doesn't really matter how we got there. The notion is that that was that first real corner in formal learning. So now, even a book from that time is available. You can find copies of these things. They still exist after hundreds of years. That's learning transfer. And then we get into technology. So remember AM radio back starting 1910, 1915, this whole notion that you could learn by audio, transmitted to your home. That was a generation. That never existed before. Then we got into visuals, television. Sunrise semester. I don't know how many of you remember that, but you could take courses from a community college if you got up at 5 a.m. and turn on your television.
I'd be all set then, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you'd have 2 hours in by 5, wouldn't you? Because you get up so early. But so all of these things, think of them as a sequence of progressions in how we get to what we have today. So social media, this whole notion of being able to communicate without communicating. We went back to visual in a sense, but we used technology to get there. And so micro-learning, all the things we've talked about on this channel about learning products, they all rest somewhere comfortably within these generations. But the other important thing about the generations is that they don't stop. We still have Generation 1. We still have Generation 2. All of these things are still in place for us as instructional designers, and we should not ignore them. So if you think about it, projected media is what? The same as painting on a cave wall. It's essentially the same thing with technology. And you start to go back and rethink, okay, all these things are connected. All of these things have a relationship. And as we go forward, these relationships in some ways become more important because they become more complicated.
Yeah.
So this whole notion of where are we? I mean, everybody could probably come up with 9 or 10 generations on their own that they think are transition points. These are just the ones that I think are important for my history of being an instructional designer.
Artificial intelligence, that's another one. I'm thinking holographic images at some point.
Well, I mean, you look at it, AI was pretty predictable if you think about it, because it's been there for a long time, and now we just have a name for it. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's Google? I mean, when you Google something, isn't that AI? We just never called it that. And yeah, they now have the ability to actually do things that weren't possible before. But I really think the next step is going to be direct connection to us, whether it's a wireless system or something else. So the student, I think it was in Korea, a medical student who actually had himself cut open and placed a Bluetooth or a Wi-Fi system behind his ear so that somebody could tell him the answers. It was embedded inside of it. And, they figured it out. And obviously, he didn't pass the test. And you look at some of the other things, Neuralink and what have you, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see at some point there's going to be a direct relationship between the source of information and knowledge and the individual. And there's going to be nothing in the middle. It's going to be wild, but I see it happening. And whether it's 5 years, 10 years, whether they outlaw it or ban it, who knows? But that's where this is going. They're going to take out the middle person. And do I need to buy a book? No, I'm just going to load it into my brain. And as far-fetched as that sounds, it's not that far off.
As instructional designers think about the future, what lessons can we learn from the evolution of learning transfer to better prepare for what is coming next?
Well, I think you have to look at what works. So within the context of the times, each of these things was incredibly powerful. Can you imagine seeing your first book that was printed? I mean, I can't even imagine how starstruck you'd had to have been with, wow, what a creation. And then we have radio. And as some people used to say, television was pictures floating through the air. And you think how important all these things were when they first came out, and how really smart people then took advantage of the technology for us as instructional designers. Because each one of these was an instructional design moment, a point at which we could capture these things that were happening and turn it into something useful. So the first instruction from person to person was just motion. Then it became language. And then it became a more permanent form of transfer. So to me as a designer, it tells me there's really nothing new, and then there's all kind of new stuff at the same time. And I will go back and I will use books. That goes back to the printing press. It goes back to that generation, how many hundreds of years ago, and we're still using textbooks. Some of them are distributed electronically, but it's still a book. And then you go back to radio. We're still using audio. How many times we use audio? Social media is largely audio. Look, you're looking at us. This is video and audio. This is a generation of learning transfer that we have now brought to our use to try to learn and to teach from. So I think as a designer, all these things are important. And they're foundationally important in the sense if you're going to be a professional in this field, you need to understand the relationships. You have to understand these relationships in the sense that this is how we got from this to that, to that, to that. And still through it all, we're still designing learning. It just happens to be more technical or more complicated or a different interface from being sitting in a classroom to picking up your phone and learning.
Yeah. My last question is, for readers who are diving into this chapter, what do you hope that they're going to be taking away about the role of learning transfer in designing effective educational experiences?
Well, I think as an instructional designer, someone who's maybe you're new to the field, maybe you have a lot of experience, you're just doing this for certification if you're in a formal learning environment like a college. I think you have to sit back for a second and think, okay, this has been going on since the beginning of civilization. And everybody seems to think instructional design is new. Well, I hate to burst the bubble here. We've been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. We just never had a name for it. And we've certainly gotten better at it. And we are able to design very complex things now based on the tools that we have. But in the end, this thing that we do, this learning design thing, has been with us the entire time. And that brings to me a level of comfort to think about that. You know what? I'm just going to take advantage of the things that exist naturally. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that me representing something, some piece of knowledge, and sharing it with you is learning transfer. And the complexity can rise exponentially, but it's still the same stuff.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Thanks, Chuck, as always, for sharing your insights with all of us. Thank you so much.